Hey, Joe, this is going to be the first full episode in which our faces are on YouTube.
Oh no. Oh no.
It's true. It's true.
And I wore my best t-shirt too for the moment.
What does it say? What's on that shirt?
It says M22, which
What
is
does that
this it's this Michigan highway that goes around the Leelanau Peninsula, which is wine country in Michigan. It's beautiful. You see views of Lake Michigan and Grand Traverse Bay the entire way. So I put this shirt on while I'm sitting here in Texas, and I dream about being someplace where it's actually cooler and there's a breeze.
Aww.
It's not 120% humidity, and my blood pressure goes down.
Be in the present, Joe.
I am.
Find the beauty of where you are.
I am. I am currently with you, getting ready to record an Afford Anything show, and dreaming about Northern Michigan while I do it. Nothing wrong with that. Is there anything wrong with that?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, welcome to the Afford Anything podcast, the show that understands you can afford anything, like a trip to Michigan wine country, but not everything, like
buying a t-shirt while you're there.
Right, like buying a t-shirt. And that's true for your time, your focus, your energy, any limited resource, the number of places you can travel. You can travel to any state. You could actually travel to every state. You could travel to every country. There's roughly around 200. We both have a mutual friend, Chris Gillibo. He went to every country. The very last country that he went to, he threw a big party and he called it his End of the World Tour.
Fabulous.
My name's Paula Pant. I'm the host of Afford Anything.
I'm Joe Saul-Sehy, frequent guest, and I don't know what else to add.
And you're a former financial planner.
Former financial planner, 16 years in the financial planning trenches.
Right. In fact, you were the WXYZ money man on Detroit's TV station.
Channel 7. It was fun 9 years doing that.
Well, and now you get to be on YouTube with me, and we are going to answer some questions here.
Huge upgrade.
Our first question today comes from Jackie.
Hi, Paula and Joe. I saw you both in Chicago during Joe's book tour. I didn't have the courage to ask you guys any questions then, so hopefully this reaches you now. I'm 42 years old in a long-term relationship with 3 children, 1 adult, which is mine, and 2 smaller children with my fiance. I've been a paralegal now for 16 years with the same firm. I'm looking to pursue my own business in real estate and investing eventually and leave my full-time job. I've been working part-time as an agent now for 3 years. I've been looking to acquire 5 cash flowing properties in the next 5 to 7 years. We are currently looking for properties 3 through 5 and doing so with the intention of cash flowing each one. I'd at least like to purchase a 3 to 4 unit before I leave my full-time employer. The hitch is that we have a limited amount of money set aside for the next purchase without touching our emergency funds for our rental properties. Home pricing keeps ramping up, and now our budget of $400K is able to buy us less and in much less desirable neighborhoods. I have a large 401K with my employer. My question revolves around whether I should quit my job, roll over my 401K into an IRA, and dive fully into my business before acquiring the next property. Or should I ramp up my search and try to make something work within our budget and then make a decision about my employment? For general context, we make a combined income from our W-2s of at least $160K and sometimes more. I have a small mortgage on my first home, which is a rental, and cash flows about $250 a month. My partner has a property that cash flows about $600 a month. We have a 1-year-old mortgage in our primary home, which we currently house hack, and it pays for a third of our mortgage, which is about $3,300 a month. We both have sizable amounts in our employer 401ks, as well as smaller Roth IRAs and after-tax brokerage accounts. We currently do not have any other outside debts other than daycare, which is about $2,000 a month, and our living expenses. I'm curious to hear both your thoughts. Paula, your thoughts on acquiring more investment properties in our current economy, and Joe, your thoughts about my employment business venture questions and future financial planning goals. Much appreciated, and thanks for doing what you do.
Jackie, congratulations on starting your your path in real estate. Like, congratulations on converting that first home into a rental, on house hacking your primary home, and on being on the search for properties number three, 4, and 5. Love the fact that you have a great emergency fund, the fact that you have your full-time job as a paralegal, you've got that part-time work as an agent, you're building a rental property portfolio, you're on the right track in so many ways. So my thoughts, you asked for my thoughts on acquiring more investment properties in our current economy. I think it's a fantastic idea, but short answer is I think it's a fantastic idea. Long answer, let me be a little bit more nuanced about the landscape that we are facing currently. So what we have seen in the past decade, and I mean particularly in 2020 and 2021, we have seen home prices rise at significantly above historic norms. So historically, if you look over a 30, I mean, 30 is skewed by the last 10. So if you look over like a 50, 60-year period, a multi-decade period, historically, real estate has appreciated around 5%. So that's 3% for inflation plus 2% above inflation. Over a very, very long-term historic average, that's what real estate in residential real estate in the United States has typically done. The last decade has been a bit of a special case, and that is for a few reasons. Number one, prior to the Great Recession, we had a massive housing inventory shortfall. In fact, before the Great Recession, and we're talking the 2008 recession, before that began, Freddie Mac was putting out warnings about lack of available inventory. And we're going to talk a little bit in a moment about why there is such a lack of available inventory. But prior to the recession, that was a problem, even though home builders were speculating and building in the lead up to the recession. So in the lead up to the recession, we had more housing than previously. You know, we had a lot of builder speculation, and yet even at the frothiest peak of builder speculation, we still were staring down the barrel of an inventory shortage. And a big piece of that, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, a big piece of that is the fact that we have huge demand from particularly millennials. And it will, again, put a pin in that, talk more about that in a moment. So prior to the Great Recession, at the height of froth, at the height of builder speculation, we still had an inventory shortfall. It only got worse. That problem exacerbated when the Great Recession happened and builders stopped building. And they stopped building for, a number of years. And not only did builders stop building new construction, but also renovators, remodelers stopped fixing homes, right? And that, there was a huge decline in 2008, 2009, 2010. It began to pick back up around 2010. And from 2010 through 2020, you saw pickup in the space, but lending criteria was still quite tight. People, it was only, think about it this way. It was only in the very later stages of that decade that you saw private equity take a strong hand in the deal. You saw BlackRock and Invitation Homes become very aggressive right around 2016, 2017. And it's easy to, think only about mom and pop investors, but you and me, mom and pop investors, are actually an incredibly small subset of people who buy and sell homes. The biggest in the residential real estate market, the biggest chunk of rental properties is held by institutional investors, namely private equity. And they were very gun shy until 2016, 2017. That's when you started seeing a lot more activity there. And so we didn't get much of an uptick in building which only exacerbated the inventory problem, and that leads us to 2020 when everything shut down for the pandemic because of the pandemic, which meant that again new construction halted. There were major disruptions in the supply chain. Remember, the cost of lumber skyrocketed, and as a result of all of that, you now have a problem of a massive housing inventory shortage that has only consistently grown worse and worse and worse. Couple that with the fact that in times of inflation, of high inflation, people tend to park their money in tangible assets, including commodities, gold, art, and houses. So you had, starting in 2020, simultaneously very low housing inventory, a problem that had been brewing for a decade. You have high housing demand, as a lot of people were buying and selling homes, and more millennials and first-time home buyers were getting into the market. And you had, as inflation started to kick up, people who wanted to park their money in tangible assets because those tend to be more inflation-proof. And so, again, that only exacerbated the problem. And you can see that by looking at what home values did from 2020 through 2021 and 2022 even. It is a historic aberration. You should never expect returns like that. Don't expect history to repeat itself. What happened from 2020 to 2022 is, in terms of the home price run-up, the culmination of all of the factors that I have just outlined. What we are seeing now, many people had wrongly assumed that if interest rates rise, home values would crash. How many Chicken Littles did you hear, doom and gloomers, did you hear saying that? And they were wrong, of course. And that's because the data does not back that conclusion. It is a simple supply and demand situation, right? Demand for homes is strong. Again, there are 72, we'll go through some facts right here, right? Millennials who were born between the years 1981 to 1996, right? Millennials are now between the ages of 26 and 41, 42. Millennials are the largest generation group in the United States. There are 72 million millennials. By contrast, there are only 65 million members of Gen X and 68 million members of Gen Z. So millennials, as a demographic, are larger than any other generation in the United States, including even baby boomers, right? And millennials at the age of 26 through 41, 42, that is typically the age in which people become first-time home buyers. So you have this huge wave of millennials becoming first-time home buyers, all of this new household formation that's happening from that generation, from my generation, that's driving a lot of demand for homes, right? On top of that, you have housing inventory disruption, which even though it is expected to rise in 2023, it will still remain below pre-pandemic levels. So you have an already tight inventory that is only getting tighter. And on top of that, now with higher interest rates, you have people who have locked in fixed rate mortgages who don't want to give up their 3%, 4% fixed rate mortgage. And so they don't want to sell their home. So you have already tight inventory getting even tighter. There's no new supply, and the people who hold the existing supply don't want to sell it. And so you have that coupled with very strong demand from new household formation, and you have this perfect recipe for home prices that will only continue to increase. Now, what we see from the rise of remote work is some shifts in where that demand is happening. So the outer rings of major urban areas are seeing more demand than ever, right? You might not necessarily want to be in Manhattan, but you might want to be in Westchester County, New York, so that you're commuting distance to Manhattan if you have a hybrid job that requires you to go to the office 2 to 3 days a week. And we had a recent guest on the podcast. What was his name? Nick Bloom, a Stanford professor who has studied remote work for since pre 9/11. He studied it back when it was still called telecommuting back in the 90s. Who has described in great detail how shifts in remote work, how the rise of remote work has shifted where people are buying homes. But largely, broadly speaking, the outer rings of urban areas, as well as mid-sized cities, suburban areas, rural areas, by and large, those are seeing a lot of uptick in demand for residential real estate. And all of the supply and demand factors point to that trend continuing.
Well, and I think that just to me also says there's also danger in talking about just the real estate market as one market in the United
Correct.
States. I mean, I mean, we truly have. I was looking at some data recently, actually just earlier today, on Airbnbs. And some of the stuff happening in Airbnb world, and totally something different happening in high tourist areas versus places like Detroit, as an example. You know, Airbnb price is doing very well there, but in some high tourist areas, you've got such a flood of these big, huge companies that have purchased so many units and turned them into Airbnbs that, you know, you've got something completely different going on there. So I think there's danger in looking at just one. Talking about the real estate market, not the case at all.
Exactly. Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I often tell the students in my course in Your First Rental Property, there is no such thing as the real estate market. There are only many local markets. So what's happening in Key West, Florida, is not the same as what's happening in Des Moines, Iowa. So when I talk about suburban areas or the outer rings of urban areas or rural areas, I mean that as a broad generalization. Sure. But of course, you know, your mileage may vary. Like what's happening in Fort Wayne, Indiana is not going to be necessarily the same as what's happening in Kennesaw, Georgia.
So what does she do?
Keep buying. Keep buying. To quote another podcast guest who's been on both of our shows, Joe, Nick
Majuli.
Nick Majuli. The name of his book is Just Keep Buying. And he means that in reference to stocks. I mean it in reference to residential rental property. Just keep buying. The one thing that I would say that I would encourage you not to buy is Class B commercial real estate. I would stay away from that. But if we're talking residential real estate, keep buying.
Well, and I also wonder if she's buying locally, if based on what you're talking about, if she then adopts more of a national scale where she looks at properties that might not be in her neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. Invest anywhere, right? There's no reason to stay in your own backyard. You go where the returns are. Yeah.
And if she's just looking in her Chicago area, maybe that's not the area that she should be looking in. But to your point, I think there certainly are deals in other places.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think generally, Paula, when she, you know, from my half of this question, when she asked about what do you think about this from a financial planning perspective, I would ask Jackie to reframe her question, because her question is, which should I do? And that game, I think you almost always lose, because you end up playing, what if I'd done the opposite? So I would ask her to reframe it as, which one do you want to do? And then let's see if it can work. Do you want to stay in your job a little longer, or do you want to leave now? I get the feeling what she's really asking is, can I leave now? And if that's the case, the reason I like that question better is, if we ask the question, can I leave now? Then I start running what if scenarios based on that question. So can we do it on a single income with a second income that's variable? How much money do I have to make from that secondary income? If I keep my goals around long-term goals of financial independence, maybe education for kids, like I don't know what the long-term goals are, but can I reach those on this single income? Or how much money do I have to make from that second income stream to make that a reality? once I know which scenario we're doing, just putting the financial planner hat on, then it's much easier then to go, okay, we can't do it today, but we can do it if we do X, Y, Z. If we meet these conditions, then we can do it. Or if there are hurdles, she has to make X amount of money, then we know how much money that is that she needs to make. So she's got this monthly number she knows that she has to bring in. So now she has a much more concrete set of goals to work with versus this thing versus this thing. The thing I want to caution her about is when she talks about having significant money in her 401k and properties are getting more and more expensive. What was the first thing you thought?
I don't see a link.
Oh, you don't see a link?
I don't see a link between 401k versus, no.
I think there shouldn't be a link, but I'm wondering if Jackie's wondering if she's thinking about rolling that 401k to an IRA so she can do a self-directed IRA to invest it in real estate.
Such a bad idea. That is such a bad idea.
Do not do that.
Such a bad idea.
Please, if that's what you're asking, Jackie, please don't do that. Do not take your 401k and turn it into an IRA and invest it in pieces of property. There are so many pitfalls there. There's so many risks. It's a minefield.
Just wait until it's RMD time.
Oh.
Woo! You're right. And I know that seems, when you're 42, that seems like it's very far away, but...
Let's talk about what Paula's talking about with RMD. So later on, she's going to have to take these things called required minimum distributions. And imagine it's in what Paula's talking about, Jackie, is imagine that it is in a non-liquid position like a piece of real estate. And all of a sudden the government's saying that you've got to take a piece of this IRA and you have to liquidate it, make it a non-IRA. How the hell, you can't peel off your bathroom and just say, this piece of the house I'm going to take out. Like, you can't do that.
Right.
Which means you're forced to sell at a time. And let's say that we're in a 2017 situation, or not 2017, 2007.
2007.
Right. We're in a 2007 situation. You don't want to sell then. You want to hold in that real estate environment, and you can't because you're forced out. So just so many nightmares. And let's say you want to visit the property. You want to maybe I'll just stay a couple. No. You just turned your whole IRA into a non-IRA overnight. It is so, you want to write a check to the cleaners who are cleaning the property for you, or to the construction people. That's got to be inside the IRA. If you write a check for any of that, you just turned all your IRA into a non-IRA. And for people not watching us on video, I just slapped my hand, and it hurts a lot more than a hand slap.
Yeah, exactly. With a self-directed IRA, every I has to be dotted, every T has to be crossed. It is massively burdensome, administratively burdensome. And in addition to that, I think the most compelling reason is the RMD situation, right? Like the required minimum distributions. You don't want to have to take distributions from an illiquid asset.
Yeah. And I know Jackie didn't say that.
Right.
But she said properties are expensive and I have massive amounts of money in my 401k. And I put those two things together in my head and went, if you're thinking that, So
no, I don't see a link. I hope there's not what I hear is I have a big 401k. Yay! Properties are expensive. Cool. Let's figure out how to acquire now before they, so that you can
even more expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I do think, Jackie, that if you take that question and work from what do I want to do and then begin framing out your financial plan from that, either you'll find out, yes, I can do it because the hurdles are so low that I can make it work. I can make my budget work. I can make my goals work. I can do that. Or you'll find out what the time frame is that you can make that a reality. I think that's the better question.
Yeah, Joe, because what you're talking about is fancy word is the counterfactual, right?
Yeah.
You don't ever want to be caught up in wondering about the counterfactual, wondering what if.
But we do that to ourselves all the time, don't we? We're like, oh, I should have, and we second guess ourselves, and that just destroys our confidence. And it's all about confidence. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
just wouldn't play it. I wouldn't play that game.
And Jackie, a final thing that I'll say is don't be afraid to look at markets where the price to rent ratios are beautiful. You know, you don't have to invest in your own backyard, especially if you're not house hacking. As long as you're not house hacking, you can invest anywhere, right? So invest where the deals are good. You've got a team that's going to be working on this anyway, you know, so find a market and start buying. I own properties in 3 states, Georgia, Nevada, and Indiana. And I live in New York City.
I love how big her goals are. I like that.
Yeah. So thank you, Jackie, for asking that question. And congratulations on everything you're building. And best of luck with what lays ahead.